Thank you, everybody. Please join me in welcoming the filmmakers Brad Barber and Scott Christopherson.
So one of you is, or is the producer, is related to the subject of the film, correct? Dub Lawrence, the subject of the protagonist in the film, his son is?
Dave Lawrence, he's here.
Right, Dave Lawrence, who's here, who's one of the producers of the film. So how did you, what was the genesis of this in terms of making a film out of this?
Yeah, actually, I knew Dave. I didn't really know Dub that well, and I was playing in a softball game with Dave in Utah. And Dub, after the game, he knew I was a documentary film professor. He approached me and said, "Hey, I want you to teach me how to edit." And he took me back to his airplane hangar and showed me this just incredible story, you know, kind of a stranger than fiction story. He had very meticulously created this 2-hour-long film that was kind of boring, but
on which case?
On Brian Wood's case specifically. Really, he had been focusing on that for 4 or 5 years, 4 years at that time, I think. And after that, Brad and I were working on a project, and I told him all about Dub, and you know, we kind of decided that we were gonna do it.
And you two had been working together prior?
Right.
What other films had you made?
Actually, it was actually just a short film up in Oregon, and it was a long drive between Utah and Oregon. That's where we talked about it, but this is our first collaboration, really, and it's our first feature. Same with Dave.
What other films had you made before this?
I've made some shorts about kind of eccentric characters, nothing social issue driven. I do a series of films right now I'm getting ready to release about people in different states, one per state. We're going around the whole country, talking about how they relate to the place. And Scott's done a bunch of stuff too on the shorts. Yeah.
Were you at the softball game when Dub?
No, I was not. I was not.
So you were there, and Dub comes to you, and then you take this to him because you knew each other, and said, "You want to work on this together?"
Right. Yeah.
Did you? Because I'm always intrigued by this. Did you take a deep breath and estimate what the cost of this was going to be to you when where were you going to get the money to make the film?
Well, not just that, the cost financially and emotionally. I mean, that's something I learned making this film, right? It was really draining that way. But yeah, I really had no idea, to be honest, like how I was going to get the money. And really, we struggled.
How did you get the money?
We struggled. I mean, we funded it ourselves. We put up the money, we fronted the money, and then once we did a Kickstarter, we got money that way. And then once we had a cut, we went to an investor friend of mine in Palo Alto, one of our executive producers, and he had funded some of my other films, and he said, "I love this," and helped us finish.
How many feature-length or full-length documentary or other kind of films had you made before this?
I'd made 0 features.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
What kind of films had you made?
I'd made a lot of short films in Thailand. I speak Thai, so I'd been there a bunch. I'd shot films in Haiti. I worked for a filmmaker named Ross McElwee, who's done a film called, one of his famous films is Sherman's March, but I worked on one of his films, but really I'd never done a feature myself.
I mean, obviously, we have a lot of questions which we might want to hold until later on in the program, wink, wink, when we bring out our special guest. But where were you on this subject before you made this film? We'll begin with you. Were you someone who was, whoops, there goes my notes that are in my phone. Where were you in terms of, was this an issue that was pissing you off and was something you were aware of, the paramilitary muscularity of municipal police departments?
But before I forget, I hope you'll indulge me and let me say just one thing real quick, because you were asking about the sort of daunting nature of making a first feature. Scott and I and our whole team are so incredibly grateful to the Hamptons International Film Festival. The whole team has been so great to us, and I'm not sure, but we kind of assume that a man like Alec Baldwin probably has other things he could be doing with his time and money, but the devotion you've done to the arts
it's very generous of you.
And documentary in particular, we're super grateful. This is going to be...
I really don't have anything else to do with my time. I come here over and over and over again and invite all these people to come hang out with me and David. And we just do it all summer long, actually.
We're tremendously grateful, and it's going to help us a lot.
But had you, this was an issue on your radar in any way?
You know, Scott and I and Dave had never made anything this social driven. We were really attracted to Dub as a character. We had noticed this kind of strange phenomenon. Scott grew up in Utah. I moved to Utah for a teaching job, and it doesn't really seem, I'm not sure if you guys would agree, Utah doesn't really seem like the type of place you'd hear about lots of paramilitary SWAT raids. And it caught our attention. We thought, this is strange, we're not kind of hearing about this more. This was in 2012 when we started making the film. And really, we were attracted to Dub and his story, and we kind of got drawn in, as people tend to be, around Dub and his convictions about how things had changed. And I think a lot of things in the film surprised people, how SWAT teams are used now for serving search warrants and things like that. And the issues, kind of came into it, but we didn't go in with a large agenda. To answer your question, we wanted to tell a story about Dub and what Dub was doing. We feel like the most authentic ways to kind of try to tell stories, even stories about universal, bigger issues, can be very personal. Telling Dub's story can be authentic because it's true to what he's doing.
What was your sense of this issue before you started making this film, and how did it change during the making of the film?
Man, it really was not on my radar at all when we started making the film. Like Brad said, we were fascinated by Dub's smile, by his charisma, right? He's a really interesting guy, and he lowers himself in sewers while doing this on the side. He's great. And, I think along the way, I lived in Texas. I lived in Austin, Texas for 3 years, and I would always still routinely read like the Salt Lake City newspapers because that's where I was from. And all these cases were just popping up like crazy as we were shooting this, right? Like the Matthew Stewart case. You just hear about it all the time, and I'm like, what's going on there, Like, it seems a lot has changed. And my grandfather was in the FBI in Utah for 25 years, so I had a great respect for law enforcement and thought, well, something's going wrong. And then, later on in our post-production process, Ferguson happened, right? And I think it kind of helped us realize this is kind of a microcosm that's representing this national issue, right? If it's happening in Utah, sure enough, it's happening everywhere.
How many people saw what was the officer's name in Ferguson who shot Brown? I'm forgetting his name. Anybody? Daryl Wilson, there you go. Did anybody see the article in the New Yorker about Daryl Wilson? There was a long piece in the New Yorker about Daryl Wilson. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the police, you read the article about the police in Ferguson and how they, what I found very interesting was not how this was done, but to the degree this was done, about how they just papered all these people with summonses and fines and late fees, and that you could just never get out from under being in debt to the municipality. The police were just ticketing people and then giving them multiple tickets on stops, and even to people who have a job, middle-class people, it might have been an amount of money that seemed reasonable, like you could handle it. These people in these poor communities are buried by this debt. They can never get out from under it, and they're always in arrears, and they can never pay, and many of them don't have a job. And the culture that created, the antagonism between, the police made you a debtor, the police put you in financial trouble. That relationship. The police had a. If this is the way I read the article, the police had a book of summonses, and they would write you a summons or multiple summonses, and you would never be able to repay the few $100s that it was there, and it just created this horrible antagonism between the people there and the police department. I think that because in the interest of time, because we want to take some questions, is that you, Joe? Is that you? I can't really see very well these days, Joe. Could we get another chair out here, please? We'll squeeze one. Why don't you slide over here, and we're going to put our, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone once Joe has that. Let's have a round of applause for Joe Brondo, everyone, please. Thank you, Joe. Everyone, let's welcome Dub Lawrence, the subject of the film. I saw this film before, and I see your story, and then I meet you, and you're such a warm guy, and I've never wanted to shake a man's hand more in my life, and then when I think about you in that sewer, I never regretted shaking a man's hand more in my life. Then I saw you peeling off all that glop off the hook there or whatever. I thought, what have I done? I've got little children at home. But anyway, so what my first question for you, all jokes aside, is, was this, whatever you want to call it, I mean, I'll let you use your own words, but this abuse of power or this militarization of the police department and so forth, was this something that was of a concern of yours before your son-in-law was killed?
Yes, actually, it's been a number of years. I realized back in the 1980s when I served as a county commissioner, I saw some deterioration in the laws that were being enacted by our legislature. We found that the police unions, the Fraternal Order of the Police, and a lot of supporters were able to get legislation passed that began to give police more and more immunity. And that became an issue back in the 80s, and as county commissioner, I actually fought two issues all the way to the state Supreme Court. One of them was on initiative petitions and referendum petition, those two issues, because our legislature restricted those issues so that the power of the people was being eroded or restricted, even though the Constitution of the United States guarantees that privilege, that right. We were, the people were not able to get a petition, enough signatures on a petition to get issues like that on the ballot. And so it was kind of a gradual deterioration that I picked up on. I ran a campaign in 1990, as mentioned in the film. The issue back then was our state legislature actually convinced the citizens to vote for removing Article 6, Section 23 from our Constitution that said any bill passed by the House or Senate must contain only one subject and be clearly identified by its title. And so I fought that issue for like 22 years. And finally in 2013, after I ran a campaign against Orrin Hatch and lost again, but the issue was passed. Representative Craig Powell from Heber, Utah, sponsored the legislation, and so we were able to get that back into our state constitution. But it took from 1982 to 2013 to do that. But
when you ran for political office, did you lack support from the law enforcement community that you had once worked in, or did they support your campaign?
I've never
did they view you as still being one of them, or did they view you as not being on their side because you wanted more transparency? Well,
it's mixed. I have a lot of support, and I have some very strong detractors. I don't know hardly how to describe this, but I think I ran as a Democrat and won in the most Republican county in the most Republican state in America. That's where President Reagan and Dan Quayle came to start their campaigns in my county. So I won as a Democrat. There have only been 3 Democrats elected in Davis County, Utah in the last 75 years. So that kind of put me in the limelight back in the 70s. And then in the 80s, I ran as a Republican and defeated the chairman of the county commission. And so back to the police, my best weapon has always been my smile. It works good. With criminals, people who, talking down people who are distraught, people who are mentally ill, barricaded suspects. The SWAT team that I founded, like I mentioned in the film, the whole idea was to be able to have the firepower, have the control, to be able to diffuse and neutralize the situation. If we had had anybody hurt or killed, either a police officer or a civilian, it would have been considered a failed operation. So it's a mentality thing. I think over the years, we have gradually changed our mentality, and you probably saw that. Even the father of Jared Frankham made this comment, and you hear it all the time. We need to go home at night. And you take that as far as the pendulum has swung, where an officer shoots somebody unnecessarily so they can go home at night. When I was I taught at the academy. I taught in-service training for my officers and police officers throughout the county when I was sheriff. And one of the things that we did, when a police officer, when I was training officers, didn't have the power to take life, except under very strict circumstances. There had to be 3 elements present. Number 1 was ability. The suspect had to have the ability to take someone else's life or to cause harm, death to someone else. Ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. If any one of those 3 elements were not present, then the police officer did not have the power or the right to take a life. Deadly force life was more precious.
I was just going to say, Dub, tell them how many, you mentioned during your tenure training the first SWAT team, tell them how many people died during your tenure.
Well, we didn't have anybody hurt or killed. Well, my SWAT team never killed anybody. And we served over 16,000 warrants, and we never had an officer hurt or a citizen hurt. So I think there's a right way and a wrong way.
When do you think that started to change? Can you pinpoint in your specific communities that you policed in, do you have a sense of when that started to change?
I think it was in the 80s. I think, I'm the oldest living sheriff of Davis County, having been elected in 1974. And there have been several sheriffs since me that have passed on, but some of the concepts and ideas of elected officials after I left office, there was changes that came about. I remember one of my opponents making this statement publicly. He said, perception is reality. The truth doesn't matter. And I think that's a very sad commentary on where politicians can get elected by spinning things improperly, by telling things in such a way as to get the support and the votes and get elected. But I think it has had a detrimental effect on our community.
Did you have a question?
Oh, I was just going to say, so what steps do you think, if this is the change that's taken place in the culture, could be taken to move back more to a sort of peace officer approach than what exists now?
I think I would concentrate on 4 different areas. Number 1 is transparency, and we don't want to spin that wrong. I mean, by transparency, I mean we need to have access to the truth. We need to have access to those records so they're not redacted or blocked from court. They get gag orders, they get restraining orders, they get orders to strike, and so the judge and jury today doesn't really get a chance to see or hear the evidence because of all the restrictions. And so back in the 1970s, one of the issues that I began fighting was plea bargaining. And I just have some articles in the paper. I just saw them the other day, dating back to the 1970s. And it said, Davis County Sheriff raps plea bargaining. That was the title in the newspaper article. And so plea bargaining has become, the ramifications of that. What's happened is the police stack charges, so you have 5 or 6 charges. In the Danielle Willard case, for example, she stopped at a house that they were staking out and made a $40 purchase of controlled substance, pulled down into a apartment complex, and the officers moved in on the car, and she was shot and killed. No weapon, no real reason to do that, but she was charged with possession with intent to distribute, attempted murder of a police officer, and the officer was charged with manslaughter, and the other officer wasn't charged at all. But both of the officers shot her in the head, and the car was backing away from her, and the bullet came through the windshield and went into her chin and lodged in her hoodie. And the other one came from the side, through the window from the side of the vehicle, and got her in the side of the head. So when you reconstruct a crime scene like that and have all those details, that's why the county attorney filed and stated that it was unjustified, and then the county attorney charged the officer that he was pretty sure he could convict. But then you saw where it's dismissed in preliminary hearing. They used the castigar hearing where the officer is protected by immunity if his job is threatened by the interrogation, even though the policy procedure allows the police officer special privileges to get an attorney. He doesn't have to submit to questioning for 24 hours, and then within 24 to 48 hours. That's not the same kind of treatment that you as a citizen have.
So when the girl that was killed, neither of them was convicted of a crime?
No.
No, that brings me to the case of Stewart. Stewart, you spent a lot of time, Wood is your son-in-law.
Right.
And the Stewart case, you spent a lot of time reconstructing that crime scene.
Right.
It's very painstaking. And he commits suicide in jail. Was it jail or prison he was in?
Jail.
He was in jail.
Weber County Jail.
He was in county jail. He commits suicide. Was he exonerated by the crime scene investigation you did? Did they prove that he did not kill the guy with the bullet?
No, he killed Jared Frankham. There were 10 officers.
Oh, he did kill him. Stewart was. You believe with your research
Frankham.
he did kill him.
The one that he was charged with that he didn't shoot was Grogan.
The guy in the face.
Yeah, Grogan. Right. Grogan was shot by Frankham. That's the evidence that it's there. If you reconstruct that where everybody was, and you spend as many hours going through by process of elimination, by putting each officer where he was, and you have a time frame, you have all kinds of video evidence, you have testimony from preliminary hearing, you have all the officer reports. When you spend months, actually. That investigation lasted 22 months, and I'm positive. But
in that case, Stewart actually killed, by your estimation, Frankham.
Yes.
Not Grogan. So he is guilty of a crime, and so it's harder for you to go in there and say that what these cops did was wrong, right, or what have you. It might have been initially, but what I'm saying is, in the case of your son-in-law, who didn't kill anyone, who didn't shoot anyone, he shot around into the trailer.
The
trailer. If you don't mind my asking, was there a civil suit that ensued from that?
Yes.
What was the result of that?
4 years in the court, and the same thing, governmental immunity, protections. The police have special privilege protections under the law that you can't use the evidence because of immunity.
So there was no settlement of a civil suit?
No settlement.
Your daughter didn't get a penny?
No.
Right.
So we resorted to the next best thing that we could do after 4 years. I met these guys, and we decided to go to the court of public opinion and try to tell the story, so you get to see it tonight.
Just another thing for people to understand who don't know, and maybe you could speak about how this has changed also during your career. During the events that happened at your daughter's home, that was her home, and her husband's home, as Brian is the first name, correct? At their home, who ultimately is in charge of that scene there? Which department is in charge of the crime scene?
Initially, it was Farmington City Police Department.
Right.
And then
that Hanson who spoke at the press conference. So ultimately, Hanson's responsible for what happened.
Well, he claims that, and there's other footage, in that same news media where he acknowledges that he made the decision along with the SWAT team commanders. When the SWAT team arrives, they take charge of the control of the. They
supersede all the other entities there.
Yeah.
Is that the same as it was when you were in law enforcement?
Pardon?
Was it the same when you were in law enforcement?
No, there's always a supervisor.
The SWAT team that the most. I don't want to. Because listen, we all have the same response, I think, to the police. We live in the New York area, so I'll just use, and these are very hot button phrases. I'll use the Cheshire murders up in Connecticut, where these guys go. When you see the story of the Cheshire murders up in Connecticut, in Cheshire, Connecticut, what these guys did, you want the cops to come and you want the cops to empty every bullet they have into these guys. You just get sick to you. So when it was like you hate the cops until you need the cops, you're suspicious of the cops until you need the cops. We all know how that plays out in New York. The thing that's upsetting when you live in New York is this transparency thing. Yeah. The thing that's upsetting when you're in New York is that they get the guy. What was his name in the city that they chokeholded? Eric Garner, I'm 57 years old now, so I'm forgetting things. But the Eric Garner case, and you know you're going to be reading the New York Times 18 months or 2 years from now, where they settled the case for like $20 million. And you and all of us have to pay that, or whatever the amount is. No, but what I'm saying is that I've always, my one criticism of Patrick Lynch was, I mean, I'll support his attitude about transparency with the NYPD in these cases, so long as the PBA pays the settlement of the case. You know what I mean? That the taxpayers don't have to pay the settlement of the case. But my point is that when you were in charge, when you were developing the SWAT apparatus in Utah, did the SWAT team have jurisdiction over the crime scene?
No.
They didn't. That's an interesting. I thought that was an interesting point.
It was new when I brought that.
And now SWAT's in charge when they come.
I brought that program to Utah from Southern California, and I sent 4 deputies to California to train. And then they trained at Fort Ord, California. I went down and trained at San Luis Obispo and LAPD and LA County. And so we learned as much as we could about techniques, negotiation tactics. And then I was always in charge. When I read the Constitution during that time after I was elected in November and took office in January, I researched everything I could, and I learned that I was the chief law enforcement officer of the county, and I'm in charge. Even though several of the chiefs of police had been around 20, 25 years, they didn't like the idea that a young rookie cop, would come in and be in charge. But I was in charge of the SWAT team. I trained the SWAT team. I was an ex-Marine in fairly good shape. And I trained them, I ran with them, I was hands-on. And I was on call 24 hours a day, round the clock, for the whole time I was there. So if there was a felony, a major felony, a robbery or a shooting or a homicide, I was notified by the dispatcher even 3 o'clock in the morning. And I did the press releases, and I responded and kept the press aware. So it was a hands-on. It's not a large department. Today it's like 350 member department. But back then it was, I had 54 sworn full-time deputies and 57 and about 100 part-time employees. So the department has grown. Over the years, a lot of things have changed. 911, I implemented that program back in the 70s too. We didn't have that countywide when I went in. We didn't have the paramedic program. That actually was the greatest contribution that I was able to make as a sheriff. I went to Kent County, Michigan, and studied paramedics provided by the Kent County Sheriff's Office. And so I brought it back to Utah and implemented a paramedic program. So the police officers there, when I left office, we were featured in EMT magazine as the most cost-effective and efficient paramedic program in the Western United States.
We're going to take some questions because we are running out of time, but I do want to say that when I see the reconstruction of the crime scene and all those lines, those firing lines, those color-coded firing lines you have, and then you reach down under the floor to find the slug that you think might have the DNA on him, I thought to myself, my God, I want to send this guy over to NBC and find out what happened to my residuals for the sitcom I was on for 6.5 years. Where did all that money go I was supposed to get paid? Only you could draw a line as to where all the money went at NBC for the last 6.5 years. I need your help. You and I are going to talk after this thing's over. We're going to take some questions. Do we have some questions in the audience? Let's get the lights up here, please. We're right over here? Right here. Go ahead. Let's get a mic for you. Do we have a mic?
I have a mic.
No. Oh. Well, we're going to go, okay. Well, you're next. Okay, well, we're going to get you back. Go ahead, up here.
The interesting thing that when I watched this film...
Is this a question or a comment?
No, it's a comment with a question.
Okay, great.
We started this, you started your SWAT team because of the riots in California. All of a sudden it was decided that the police force, the way it was not necessary. But now that the society was rioting out of hand, someone must have thought, you yourself, that a SWAT team was necessary. At the end, I looked at this whole thing, And I look at us today, and I have to say, the first thing we have to do is disarm America. Your son-in-law had 2 guns. He had 2 pistols. He was disturbed, mentally worried. They couldn't get him out of the car. We have to unarm America. If none of these, when the boy with the bat said, the cop said to him, if you had a shotgun, I would have killed you, but you had a bat, you lived. This is the problem.
Okay, no question. Okay, great. No, but I think but he does make a good point, which I think it's interesting. The 2 most interesting points to me in the film were the guy with the baseball bat and the kids. And I think to myself, we live in a society where people are encouraged, and it's constitutionally protected, obviously, by the Second Amendment to have guns. And you think to yourself, we live in a world where that guy who lives in that house is told, with kind of metronomic regularity, get a gun to protect yourself, get a gun. And if he had pulled up a gun in that doorway when that door opened, he would have been blown to pieces. So I find that ironic. And the second thing was the tragedy, because tragedy, obviously, is the moment when the parents come in and tell themselves what they must. They tell themselves the only thing they can tell themselves, which is that our kid was a hero. The father and the mother wanted to see the sight. And they don't want any. I think that they. Well, I can't quite speak to how much facts they were presented. Were they given all of the facts in the case, as far as you're concerned?
The Frankham parents?
Right.
No, I mean, they weren't aware of the 54 bullets and all the evidence that Dub had found. I mean, they haven't seen the film yet.
They haven't seen the film.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a question here.
Yeah, just to return to the Matthew Stewart case, I had the strong impression that he didn't understand or wasn't necessarily convinced that these were police officers at all. I mean, perhaps after the fact he certainly understood that, but in the interrogation even, he suggested that these were simply intruders. And then as I heard Mr. Baldwin make comments and you responding, is it your conclusion that he ultimately understood that he was shooting a police officer, the one that was ultimately killed?
Yes, I think it became obvious, but at some point.
Why would it be obvious if they're not in uniform? They don't announce that they're police officers.
Well,
what makes it obvious?
What I do is put myself in the same position. I try to live the same thought process as a suspect, or the same process as the officer, and I do that with each one as I profile each participant in the crime. And when I put myself in his position, and when they are kicking in the door yelling police search warrant, he said, in the interview, he said there's several branches out there. He didn't know specifically who they were, but he was growing a controlled substance, and it was a warrant, and they yelled. And so you've got the thing that triggered it was that they fired 30 rounds at him before he returned fire. He turned the light on in the bedroom and opened the door wide as Grogan and Draper were coming down the hall, and he tried to show them, don't shoot me, I don't want to die, basically is what he was attempting to do, but because that hallway. That's
your conclusion from the investigation.
My conclusion was that when they opened fire on him and they shot him in the arm and he jerked the gun back, then Draper, and then you've got Frankham in the kitchen through a little slot. You could see that little narrow slot through that's all he could see, but the light was off in the bathroom. So it was a silhouette that he fired at. And you've got flashes in that hallway with the rounds going off. So actually, Draper actually fired 2 rounds at Grogan's gun as he was shooting down the hall toward the bedroom. And so there was a lot of turmoil. It was a very, very chaotic scene.
For both the filmmakers, the guy with the golf club who gets shot rather hastily, but that was like horrific to me. Was there any civil lawsuit that didn't follow there? What happened in that case?
No, go ahead.
That was the Todd Blair case. That piece got leaked to the press. The Salt Lake Tribune got a helmet camera that was actually worn by Jared Frankham, the officer that was killed a year later. That's his helmet camera. that...
Was he one of the people that fired on Blair and shot Blair?
No, that was just...
No, he didn't fire.
It was just Troy Burnett,
Troy
one
Burnett
officer.
was the officer who fired on. But in that case...
She didn't get anything, right? Like, it was ruled justified, like the officer was justified,
yes,
in shooting him, because he supposedly feared for his life because he thought it was a sword.
A sword.
Right.
Well,
okay.
I actually got I got Jared Frankham's whole helmet camera footage through a grandma request, and it's about 40 minutes long. And when I processed it and went through it second by second and listened to everything that was said on it, it revealed a lot about that incident. He actually turned it on when they met before they even approached the house. And so they actually had a key. You don't see that in that little piece that was, but you hear them bang banging as they knocked the door open. But they didn't crash that door in. They didn't use a tool, they used a key. And they opened the door with a key, bang bang, and then swung the door open. And also they didn't have the warrant with them. So they served a warrant and actually didn't even have the warrant. But there's a lot of problems with that was discovered. And I did, no, I'll stop, that's enough.
Can I say something
real
quick about that? I hope that's something that maybe you felt. It was very important to Scott and I to not throw police officers under the bus. In fact, the opposite, to help us understand what it's like to be them in these crazy situations and ultimately to protect them as well as civilians. Scott, do you want to talk about meeting Troy Burnett specifically? I know that
right, yeah. I went to lunch with the guy that shot the guy in the golf club.
Right.
I took him out to lunch. He talked to me about shooting him. He had killed another citizen in the line of fire. Someone was shooting at him, and he'd killed a couple people, and you could clearly tell he had some type of PTSD. I mean, he was torn up about it. And he eventually connected me with the 12 officers in the Matthew David Stewart case. He knew that I really respected law enforcement. My grandfather, like I mentioned earlier, was in the FBI. And I kind of sat in a room with these 12 officers, and they talked to me or grilled me for several hours about what was my agenda, or what were we trying to do with this film. And eventually you saw 2 of those officers actually in the film. But it took months and months to kind of get access to them. But like Brad said, I think it was important to us to give the police a voice, right? I think, we were talking earlier at the get-together, right, where you had mentioned, look, police a lot of the time have good intentions, right? Most of the time they have good intentions. Maybe a select few do or don't, but we wanted to kind of get inside their heads about what was it like to be in this situation, right?
I just wonder in New York, I mean, I've lived in the city off and on, mostly on, for quite a while, since I was in college. And I often wonder, and I don't want to open up this can of worms, but we can talk about this later on maybe, but do we make the job harder to get and pay them more money and have a more elite police department? Do we say that you're going to have to be bilingual and have 4 years of college and have more gun training and pay them $80,000 or $100,000 a year and reduce the size of the police department so you don't have people who don't know what they're doing with a gun? Because based on what I can see, most officers don't really know what they're doing with a gun. They don't know how to shoot a gun. They don't know they don't know when to shoot a gun. I mean, I know, as a friend of mine said, if you're in a narcotics squad and you're chasing some drug dealers and you want to match them bullet for bullet, whatever scenario you want to paint, and you're running down an alleyway in New York, I'd be the first person to just start emptying out my gun, probably. I mean, I'm being honest about that. I'd be terrified. And so my point is, I probably shouldn't be a cop then. I should probably just play one on a television show. But I think that we need to have better training and make the job tougher to get, because the job has become more complicated. The job has become more complicated, and therefore we have to have better people doing the job. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think that's moving in the right direction. I think there has been a deterioration in the mentality, the attitude of law enforcement officers, and some of the things that we did a long time ago brought that about. When we let officers train in our academies, where they train to shoot, they call it double tap, make sure that it's a kill shot, You know, if an officer is trained to fire twice at center of mass, that training, if that's the kind of training they have and that's what they're good at and they practice that, and every shot is a kill shot, then there's not much chance if they fire a gun, it's going to be a kill shot, and that's not the right way to go, in my judgment.
I was going to add something. Yeah, I was just going to say.
One more question.
I think it's just crazy that cops are there in the first place, right? I think it's they shouldn't even be there using weapons to carry out a search warrant, right? There's the point of what I've learned from this process is like Dub's 16,000 warrants, no one was killed, and no one had, you didn't have to be there with guns to arrest this person. You could have done it in the light of day, right? You could have said, hey.
You do it in the daylight, I mean, the Constitution prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. And when we kick in the door in the middle of the night with 10 guys with guns drawn and destroy that house, over $50,000 worth of damage to that house, you saw the door, when they nail it with that big ram tool and destroy the house, and then they come kicking in the middle of the night. I mean, I think there's a mayor somewhere out here, that got kicked in the middle of the night like that. I read.
In Maryland.
That situation shouldn't exist. If warrants should be served with reason and prudent judgment. And if a guy works, and he comes out of his house, just wait till he comes to his car, pull in around him, surround him, and just serve. And the way I used to do it, and it works good, is just walk up and say, hey, I'm Sheriff Dub Lawrence. I got a piece of paper here you need to take a look at. And if you can,
I want you to come to my house when it's my daughter's nap time. Going to solve a lot of problems
in
my house.
I mean, it works. Nobody gets
Sheriff
hurt.
Dub Lawrence, and it's nap time. We got time for one more because we're going to run late here. We're right here on the end here. Thank you. Is the mic on?
Even if a cop feels threatened, why doesn't he shoot to harm and not kill? They always seem to shoot to kill. And when it's so unnecessary, unless you've got a serial killer that is on the loose.
Well, my solution to that is don't shoot unless you have to. I mean, if to shoot first or to resort to deadly force without trying other options, instantly just resort to deadly force, is the wrong approach. It's totally wrong to do that. That takes it so far to the extreme,
right, exactly.
To start out. I mean, you're absolutely correct. But there again, if somebody's got a gun or a weapon, you do train to kill because even if a person's wounded, they can, if they have a weapon or the capability, if they have the ability, they can still kill you. And so the training is to instantly take the life and reduce the threat immediately.
Let me just say that we are out of time. I just want to say this is the last of our screenings for this summer. And David, please remind them the dates. The Hamptons International Film Festival is
October 8th to the 12th.
October 8th through the 12th. Get your tickets. Hey, let's have a round of applause for our filmmakers and our special guest, Sheriff Lawrence. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. Thank you.